Christmas dinner should have been about family, love, and tradition. Instead, my own son, who'd been living rent-free in my house for 8 months, looked me in the eye and called me a freeloader. His wife nodded in agreement. The guests froze. I calmly replied, "You have until morning to leave." The snow crunched under my boots as I hurried home from the library. My volunteer shift had run longer than expected. Mrs. Henderson needed help sorting through the mountain of holiday returns, and I didn't want to be late for Christmas Eve in my own house. Margaret, my late wife, would have insisted everything be ready. The stockings hung, the fire glowing, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the rooms. Even after 4 years without her, I still kept those traditions alive. When I stepped through the door, shaking off snow and hanging my coat in the hall closet, I was greeted not by warmth, but by something colder than the December air. Dylan, my son, sat sprawled across my leather recliner, shoes propped on the coffee table I'd refinished myself last spring. He didn't even look up. His eyes stayed glued to his phone screen, the Christmas lights reflecting off it like a private stage. "Finally showed up," he muttered, thumbing through his feed. "Thought you got lost in your book sorting again." My heart sank. That chair, it had been mine since Margaret picked it out 20 years ago. It was where I read every night, where I'd sipped tea after long shifts at work, where I'd clutched Margaret's hand during her last Christmas, and now Dylan treated it like a throne he had claimed. 8 months of this. 8 months of him and Stella, his wife, living under my roof, eating my food, using my electricity without paying a dime. When he first showed up in April with 2 suitcases and a temporary setback, I said yes. That's what family does. You help. I thought it would be for a few weeks, maybe a month, but weeks turned into months and months into entitlement. "Good evening," I said evenly, stepping into the living room, adjusting my sweater to hide the irritation rising inside me. "How are preparations for tomorrow going?" Stella emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. Her blonde ponytail was pulled so tight it made her look younger than her 32 years. She didn't meet my eyes. "We'll handle tomorrow ourselves," she said, her back still turned. Dylan didn't even glance up. "Don't need your help, Dad." Their words hit harder than they probably realized. "We'll handle it, don't need you." As if I was some outsider intruding on their holiday. I glanced around the room. The decorations I had carefully set up 3 weeks ago. Garland draped along the mantel, stockings hung with care. The ceramic nativity Margaret had collected piece by piece. Everything was in its place, everything except my family. "The Smiths are excited about tomorrow," Dylan added suddenly, finally lifting his eyes from the phone. "The Smiths?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, John and Mary. They're bringing that potato salad everyone loves." My chest tightened. "The Smiths are coming to Christmas?" Dylan raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Oh, didn't we mention it? Yeah, them. Ann from next door. Tom from my old job, too. Just a few people." He waved his hand dismissively. I stared at him, gripping the edge of an ornament on the tree. "When did this get decided?" "Last week sometime?" He shrugged, already scrolling again. "Stella sent the invites. You were probably at the library." Of course, they knew my schedule. Tuesdays and Thursdays I always volunteered at the library. They had planned it while I wasn't there, deliberately avoiding including me. My house, my food, my table, my holiday. And I hadn't even been consulted. "How many people exactly?" I pressed. 6, maybe 7, Stella called over her shoulder, her voice flat as ice. I looked at the dining room. The fancy groceries that had been appearing in my fridge suddenly made sense. The premium turkey, the expensive wines, the elaborate centerpieces. All of it had been arranged without me. Paid for, no doubt, with my pension money. "Don't worry, old man," Dylan said, stretching like a king in his stolen chair. "We've got it handled." Old man. The words settled in my chest like a stone. I was 65, yes. Retired, yes. But I wasn't useless. I wasn't a burden. And this was still my house. I straightened an angel ornament Margaret had painted herself, running my thumb over the delicate brush strokes. She would have been gracious. She would have welcomed the unexpected guests and smiled through it all. But Margaret wasn't here, and I wasn't Margaret. "Well," I said quietly, swallowing the weight in my throat, "I suppose I should get out of your way then." "Good idea," Dylan muttered, already lost in his phone again. I stood there a moment longer, watching him lounge in my recliner, watching Stella command my kitchen, listening to them plan their perfect Christmas without me. Then I turned and climbed the stairs. Each creak under my feet felt heavier than the last. My hand brushed the banister Margaret had polished for years. Upstairs, the sound of Stella's voice drifted up. Tablecloths, seating arrangements, party plans. I shut my bedroom door softly behind me. Downstairs, my family was preparing for a holiday I hadn't been invited to, in my own house. And for the first time that season, I felt truly alone. The stairs creaked beneath me as I retreated to my room, each step pulling me farther from the noise of my living room and closer to silence. Behind me, Dylan and Stella moved about like they owned the place. My son in my chair, his wife in my kitchen. My house had become their stage, and I was reduced to the role of background extra. Inside my bedroom, I shut the door and leaned against it, the faint hum of conversation still slipping through the floorboards. I stood in the quiet for a moment, just breathing, trying to collect myself. The smell of pine drifted from the Christmas tree downstairs, but instead of bringing warmth, it reminded me how foreign my own home had started to feel. I walked to the small desk by the window, pulling open the drawer with its familiar scrape. Inside were the photo albums Margaret had once kept so carefully. She'd loved documenting our lives. Every moment, every milestone, every holiday. Even now, 4 years after her passing, her handwriting labeled each page: Dylan's first birthday, family vacation 1990, Christmas 2002. The first album I opened fell to our wedding photo. Margaret, radiant in her lace dress, and me in a borrowed suit, both of us beaming like we'd won the world. In a way, we had. I turned the page. Dylan at 6 months, cheeks round and eyes sparkling, reaching for the camera. Another turn, and there he was at 8, grinning from beneath the blanket fort we'd built in the very same living room where he now sat, dismissing me like an unwanted guest. Another page. Graduation. His cap tilted, diploma in hand, pride radiating from him. That was the boy Margaret had defended fiercely, insisting he just needed time, patience, and love. I flipped further. Dylan at 25, the year he landed his first management job. He'd called me that night, his voice full of excitement. "Dad, I finally made it. I'm going places." But somewhere along the line, that hard-working young man had vanished, replaced by someone who took shortcuts, leaned on excuses, and assumed others would clean up the mess. 8 months ago, he'd arrived on my doorstep with Stella, 2 suitcases, and a sob story about being laid off. "Just for a couple of weeks, Dad, until we get back on our feet," he'd promised. I hadn't hesitated. I'd opened the door. Because that's what you do for family. You help. But help is supposed to be a bridge, not a permanent foundation. I pulled out the notebook I kept beneath the albums, flipping to the pages where I'd tracked everything. It was a habit Margaret used to tease me about: my lists, my calculations, my need to keep order. "You engineer the grocery shopping, Jasper," she'd laugh. But numbers didn't lie. Utilities up 37% since April. Grocery costs nearly doubled. Water usage tripled thanks to Stella's hour-long showers and Dylan's refusal to wait until the dishwasher was full. Even worse, I'd seen the credit card statement Dylan carelessly left on the counter last week. $250 at the electronics store, $300 at the mall. Wireless headphones, designer jeans, all while living rent-free, all while I clipped coupons to stretch my pension. The notebook didn't just hold numbers, it held proof. Proof that my generosity had been taken advantage of. Proof that my son had mistaken kindness for weakness. I looked up at the framed photo of Margaret on the dresser. Her smile was gentle, patient, forgiving. She'd always believed Dylan would find his way, that he just needed more time. But Margaret wasn't here anymore. And the truth was impossible to ignore. Dylan hadn't been finding his way. He'd been taking mine. A door slammed downstairs, Stella's voice sharp with irritation, Dylan's muffled reply dismissive. Their bickering was a soundtrack I'd grown used to, echoing through rooms where peace used to live. I closed the notebook and tucked it back into the drawer, the weight of it like a stone in my chest. My sanctuary, my bedroom, felt smaller now, suffocated by the realization that I wasn't living in my home anymore. I was hiding in it. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the streetlight, settling over the neighborhood like a blanket of peace. The Johnsons' inflatable Santa waved cheerfully from across the street, oblivious to the storm brewing inside my walls. Families everywhere else were preparing for joyful mornings, laughter, and gifts under the tree. But me? I was sitting alone, running numbers, counting costs, and realizing that the greatest expense I'd paid wasn't money. It was dignity. 8 months of sacrifice, 8 months of being disrespected, 8 months of watching my house become theirs. And for the first time, I felt the stirrings of something stronger than patience. Christmas morning arrived not with joy, but with the clatter of pots and the hiss of running water. I woke naturally, no alarm needed. 40 years of early rising had trained my body too well. Through the frosted window, I saw the yard covered in untouched snow. Peaceful, pure. But the peace ended the moment I stepped into the hallway. From downstairs came Stella's voice, brisk and animated. She was on the phone with someone, probably one of the guests. "Yes, 7 sharp. Don't forget the potato salad, Mary." Her tone carried energy I hadn't heard in months, almost giddy with control. I walked into the kitchen doorway and stopped cold. The scene before me looked less like a family Christmas and more like a banquet hall preparing for service. Stella stood at the stove juggling 3 different pans while basting what looked like a 20-pound turkey. The counters were lined with expensive crystal bowls and silver platters I didn't recognize. Even the dining table was draped in a cream tablecloth I'd never seen before. And on top of it all, the thing that cut deepest was Margaret's china. The good set. The one I hadn't touched since her funeral. I'd stored it in the attic safe and untouched. A sacred reminder of the holidays we'd shared. Yet here it was, set out like props for a performance. "Morning," Stella said without glancing up. "Coffee's fresh." I stepped further in, scanning the table. 8 place settings, 8 wine glasses, 8 folded napkins. "Stella," I said slowly, "how many people did you invite?" She didn't answer. Instead, Dylan emerged from the living room, hair unkempt, wearing the same wrinkled shirt from yesterday. He walked straight past me to the coffee pot, poured into my favorite mug, the blue ceramic one Margaret gave me for my 60th birthday, and didn't so much as acknowledge me. "Your mother and I used to cook Christmas dinner together," I said carefully, watching him sip from my mug. "Simple meal, just family." Dylan shrugged. "Well, this isn't just family anymore. We thought you'd want to celebrate properly." Properly. The word stung, as if the quiet, intimate Christmases I'd shared with Margaret hadn't been enough. As if my traditions were somehow inadequate. "Who exactly is coming?" I asked. Dylan rattled off names casually, like a grocery list. John and Mary Smith, Ann from next door, Tom from the store, his girlfriend, maybe Rick if he's off work. Oh, and Stella's sister might drive down. My stomach sank. 8 guests, maybe 9. All strangers to me, all about to sit around my table, eat my food, drink my wine. "This seems like quite an undertaking for a casual Christmas dinner," I muttered. Stella finally turned from the stove, cheeks flushed from the oven's heat. "We just wanted to do something special. Show people how grateful we are." Grateful, the word rang hollow. If they were grateful, they wouldn't have turned my home into their stage without asking. I glanced back at the turkey in the oven, the expensive wine bottles breathing on the counter, the shrimp platter glistening under plastic wrap. None of it was bought on their dime. It was all mine. My pension, my savings, my grocery budget. The kitchen timer dinged. Stella spun back to the oven, pulling out a tray of homemade rolls. The smell was heavenly. Yeast, butter, warmth. But to me, it didn't smell like family, it smelled like intrusion. "What time are people arriving?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't matter. 2 o'clock, Dylan said, as if he were announcing the start of a show. I checked the clock. 5 hours until my quiet home would be filled with unfamiliar voices, until my living room became a stage for Dylan and Stella's performance of hospitality. Without a word, I refilled a mug, not my own, since Dylan had claimed it, and retreated to the living room. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, but even it seemed diminished. Folding chairs had been dragged up from the basement, crowding the space, pushing my reading chair against the wall like an afterthought. My house didn't look like mine anymore. It looked like a rented hall. Through the doorway, I could see Stella moving like a general on the battlefield, directing the kitchen with efficient precision. Dylan hovered nearby, uncorking wine, opening packages, playing the part of her assistant. Together, they looked like a team preparing for their Christmas. The house phone rang. Dylan answered with a booming cheer. "Merry Christmas, yes, everything's on schedule. Can't wait to see you." My jaw tightened. He sounded like the homeowner, like the host, and me, I was just the extra again, standing in the background of my own life. I sat down in my displaced chair, staring at the glowing tree. For decades, this house had been my refuge, my safe haven, the place Margaret and I built together. But now it felt like I was just a tenant, one who wasn't even invited to the party. And for the first time that morning, I realized something chilling. Christmas wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to Dylan and Stella. At least they thought it did. The clock struck 6 when the doorbell rang, the sound slicing through the tension that had been building all day. I rose from my chair, straightened my sweater, and moved toward the front door. Through the frosted glass, I saw 2 bundled figures waiting on the porch. For a moment I hesitated. This was my home, my door, yet somehow it felt like I was opening it for someone else's party. When I pulled it open, Mary Smith's cheerful face greeted me. She beamed, her arms full with a covered dish and a bottle of wine wrapped in red paper. Behind her, John stamped snow off his boots. "Jasper," Mary exclaimed warmly, "thank you so much for inviting us." The words hit me like a blow. Thank you for inviting us. To my own home. I forced a polite smile and stepped aside. "Of course. Please, come in." They bustled past me, full of seasonal cheer, peeling off coats and handing them to me without hesitation. I hung them carefully in the hall closet, the closet Margaret and I had organized together 30 years ago. And as I placed their jackets beside my own, I wondered when exactly had I become the butler. "Oh, it smells divine," Mary called, her voice carrying from the living room. "Stella must be an amazing cook." I swallowed hard and followed them in. Stella's dishes were neatly arranged across the dining table, gleaming under the chandelier. The cream tablecloth shimmered like something out of a holiday magazine, nothing like the simple spreads Margaret and I had cherished. The doorbell rang again. Ann Wilson, my next-door neighbor, stood on the porch with a plate of sugar cookies. Her smile was warm, familiar. She'd lived across the street for as long as I had. "Merry Christmas, dear," she said, sweeping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I brought your favorites. Dylan said you loved these." Dylan said, not me, not my words. Dylan had spoken for me, chosen for me, claimed my preferences as if they were his own. "That's very thoughtful," I managed, forcing another smile as I placed the cookies on the side table. The living room filled quickly. Coats piled in the closet. Voices rose, laughter spilling through the air. One by one, more guests arrived. Tom Brown from Dylan's old job, his girlfriend Lisa, and eventually even Rick from down the street. "Great place you've got here," Tom said loudly, looking around in admiration as he set a case of beer on the coffee table. He raised his bottle in Dylan's direction. "Beautiful home, man." My throat tightened. My home. But Dylan grinned and accepted the compliment as if it were his. I moved quietly through the room, offering drinks from my bar cart, handing out glasses I'd owned for decades. My hands knew exactly where to reach, exactly which bottles were half full, exactly which corkscrew worked best, because this was my house. But to the guests, Dylan and Stella were the hosts. I was nothing more than a shadow, silently keeping things running. "You've decorated so beautifully," Mary said, her eyes on the ornaments glimmering from the tree. "These must be family heirlooms." "Yes," I replied softly, truth slipping out before I could stop it. "They've been part of this home for a long time." John had been studying the photos on the mantel, pictures of Margaret, of me, of Dylan through the years. His brows furrowed slightly. "How long have you and Dylan lived here together?" The question hung in the air like smoke. My stomach clenched. Around me, conversations faltered as other guests leaned in, curious. I opened my mouth, unsure whether to reveal the truth or protect Dylan's carefully constructed lie. "Well, it's complicated," I said at last. But before anyone could press further, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Dylan emerged, freshly showered, wearing the expensive shirt I remembered watching him buy just weeks ago with money he didn't have. He strode into the living room with all the swagger of a man stepping onto a stage. "Sorry I'm late," he announced, his voice booming with forced cheer. "Hope Dad's been taking good care of you all." Dad, not Jasper. Dad, a word that placed me in the role of helper, a secondary character propping up his performance. "Oh, absolutely," Anne said warmly. "Such a gracious host." Dylan's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. "Well, he certainly knows his way around the house." A few chuckles rippled through the room, casual, innocent to the guests, but I felt the barb in every syllable. Of course I knew my way around. I'd lived here for decades. Every creak in the floor, every scratch on the wood, every photo on the wall was my history. And yet, Dylan was spinning a story where I was a supporting character in his home. Tom raised his beer toward him. "Must be nice having so much space, man." "It has its advantages," Dylan replied, sipping from his glass. "Though it gets expensive, keeping up a place like this." The casual way he said it nearly made me laugh. Expensive, yes, but not for him. For me. For the man still clipping coupons while Dylan poured expensive wine into crystal glasses, all under the pretense of being a successful host. I stayed quiet, sinking into the chair that had been shoved against the wall to make room for the folding seats. I watched as Dylan moved effortlessly through the room, greeting guests, basking in their admiration. But the smiles and laughter ringing through the house couldn't cover the truth. Every person here had been lured into a performance, a carefully staged illusion of Dylan's success. The food, the decorations, the house, all funded by my sacrifice. And I sat in the corner, silent, watching my own son play host in a house he didn't own. The day stretched ahead of me like an endless stage play, each scene orchestrated without my input, each act a reminder of my erasure. I knew the climax hadn't come yet. But when it did, the audience, these guests, these neighbors, would finally see the truth, and Dylan would discover what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Dinner was announced with a bright, ringing voice from the kitchen, Stella S. voice, cutting through the warm glow of candlelight and the low murmur of conversation. The dining room sparkled like a magazine spread, cream tablecloth pulled tight, crystal glasses catching the light, Margaret's china gleaming like old memories summoned back to service. The centerpiece was lush and overdone, pine, berries, gold ribbon, the kind of thing you buy to be admired, not loved. I moved with everyone else toward the table, slow and steady. It was automatic for me to drift to the head of the table. I'd sat there for nearly 3 decades. That chair had seen birthdays, quiet weeknights, and every Christmas that mattered. It had seen Margaret smile. It had seen Dylan's school projects, scattered across placemats while we checked math and built volcanoes out of baking soda. It had seen the good life. It remembered. So did I. I reached the head of the table, fingers brushing the top of the chair. Dylan stepped in front of me. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His body blocked the chair like a velvet rope. His smile was too bright, too showy, meant for an audience. The guests slowed, the chatter dimmed, the candles hissed softly. "Stop," he said. Just that. Cold, flat, and loud enough to make forks pause mid-air. I blinked, pulled my hand back, and looked at him. Really looked. The expensive shirt he couldn't afford. The watch he'd bragged about once and never mentioned again. The posture of a man performing confidence. "What did you say?" I asked, voice even. "You're not invited to this dinner table, freeloader." The word hit harder than any shove. Somewhere to my left, Mary gasped. To my right, Tom's beer bottle halted and lowered. Anne's mouth made a small O. Stella stood in the doorway like a stage manager, dish towel in hand, eyes cool, chin raised. I felt my heart slow and steady itself. The room flattened into angles and lines, like a blueprint. I could see where this was going. I could see the stress lines, the weak beams, the point where the structure would fail under pressure. "Freeloader," I repeated, almost curious, like I was testing the shape of the word. The china hummed in the silence. The house listened. Dylan's chin lifted, boosted by the attention. "That's right." His voice carried, bigger than the room. "All day you do nothing. Act like you own the place." "I do own the place," I said. Not loud, not angry, just true. A few eyes swung from him to me, from me to the family photos on the wall. Decades of Margaret and me in front of this same house, Christmas after Christmas. The history wasn't subtle. It was framed and hung for anyone with eyes to see. "Dylan," Anne said gently, "that's your father." "And?" he shot back. "What does that buy him? He sits around, adjusts ornaments, moves slow on purpose so we have to do everything. He thinks a couple of dusty decorations and volunteering twice a week makes him some kind of hero." Across the table, Mary's face softened with confusion. "Jasper has always seemed—" "You don't know him," Dylan snapped. "You've known him for, what, 10 minutes? He's controlling. He's always been controlling. Every penny, every decision, every tiny thing has to go exactly his way." I could feel the guests pull in and hold their breath. Stella didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was agreement signed in ink. I let the moment sit. Then I turned slightly toward the table, not toward Dylan. "Can I ask a few questions? For clarity?" Mary nodded instinctively, as if we were in a community meeting. John's arms crossed. He watched both of us like a referee who'd seen 100 games. I pointed gently, not accusatory, at the lights, the candles, the chandelier. "Does anyone here believe Dylan pays the power bill that keeps these on?" Dylan barked a laugh. "Oh, here we go." I continued, voice steady. "Does anyone think he paid for the food on this table? The wine you're drinking? The groceries for the last 8 months? Tom looked at his bottle, then at Dylan, then back at me. Lisa fidgeted with her napkin. Anne's gaze shifted to the china. "Whose dishes are these?" she asked quietly. "Margaret's," I said. "My late wife's. We kept them in the attic after the funeral. I didn't know they were being used tonight." Stella's jaw tightened, just enough to be seen by anyone watching. Mary's lips parted, the realization creeping in. "Whose name," she asked softly, "is on the deed to this house?" Dylan's mouth opened and closed. "That's not... We all live here, it's complicated." "It isn't," John said, voice neutral but firm. He looked at me. "Yours?" "Mine," I said. "Purchased in 1987 with Margaret. Paid off 12 years ago. All current utilities and taxes are in my name." I returned my gaze to Dylan. "How long have you and Stella been living here?" He didn't answer. His fingers flexed at his sides. The silence grew teeth. 8 months, I said for him. "We agreed it would be the couple of weeks until you got back on your feet." "That was the plan," Dylan said, brittle. "But the job market—" "You bought a $300 pair of sneakers last month," I said, still almost conversational. "And an $80 bottle of cologne the week before. You left the receipt on the counter." "That's not—" "You're twisting. And a watch you set on the coffee table earlier," I added. "Nice piece, pricey." The room tilted. I didn't raise my voice, I just put the facts on the table with the silverware. Stella stepped forward a fraction. "We were trying to make Christmas special," she said, finally speaking. "For everyone. Using my wife's china," I said, "from my attic without asking." "It's Christmas," she said, appealing to the room. It's family. Mary's hand tightened around her glass. Family doesn't shame family at their own dinner table, she said, eyes on Dylan. He flinched like she'd touched a bruise. And then the performance cracked. Just a hairline split at first. This is our dinner party, he shot back. We invited our friends. We planned it. We did the work. He wants to come in and take over. No, Anne said. He wants to sit at his table. The crack widened. I rested my hand on the chair back again, not to claim it, but to steady the room. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to eat supper on my wife's china in my home. Your home? Dylan's voice climbed a step. You think paying a few bills makes you king? You think you can just order us around? You're using my utilities, eating my food, and hosting people I didn't invite, I said. The only ordering side we done is mowing the lawn and fixing the leaky sink because someone have forgot to tell me it was dripping for 3 weeks. Tom coughed into his fist to hide a grimace. Rick stared at his hands, suddenly very interested in the veins on his knuckles. Dylan spread his arms to the room, seeking allies. See, controlling, petty. This is what he does. He makes everything about him, every minute of every day. I tilted my head, studying him the way you study a machine that keeps jamming. You called me a freeloader, I said, in front of my neighbors in my house. Silence again, thick and pulsing. Answer Mary's question, John said softly, almost kindly. Whose name is on the deed? Dylan's jaw bunched. It doesn't matter. It matters, Mary said, because I am starting to feel like I've been invited to a show where the lead actor didn't to write the script, direct the play, or build the theater. A few people exhaled, short, surprised sounds that weren't quite laughs. Stella flushed, then gathered the dish towel tighter, as if it could give her a different scene. I looked at the place settings. 8 plates, 8 wine glasses, 8 forks aligned like soldiers. Let me add one more thing, I said. If I'm a freeloader, then who paid the last 8 months of groceries? Who covered the spike in the power bill, the water bill, the gas? Who paid for the car insurance when your policy lapsed? Who? That's enough, Dylan snapped, the volume spiking. You don't get to humiliate us. I'm not humiliating you, I said. I'm answering your accusation. He slammed both palms on the table. The plates jumped, the wine shivered. Margaret's china trembled and my heart clenched. Go to your room, he said, pointing at the stairs like a furious parent disciplining a child. Now. No one moved. The house held still around the command like it was deciding who it belonged to. I didn't blink. No, I said simply. Something in his face twitched. He wasn't expecting that little word to weigh so much. He wasn't expecting it to drop like a stone into the center of his performance and crack the stage. Dylan, Anne said quietly, everyone is uncomfortable. He whirled on her. Don't tell me how to talk to my own father. Then don't talk to him like this, Mary said, her voice steady. Not here, not tonight, not ever. He scanned the faces, looking for the affirmation he'd counted on, the nods, the laughter, the easy complicity. All he found were eyes that wouldn't meet his, a friend pretending to check a text, a neighbor tracing the edge of a napkin with her finger. The script had slipped away from him. I leaned closer to the table, set my fingertips on the wood Margaret and I had polished 1,000 times. Dylan, I said, how much do you owe on the credit cards? He stared at me defiant. None of your business. You left the bill on the counter last week, I said. 12,000, while you live here for free. Tom let out a low whistle before catching himself. Stella closed her eyes. For the first time that night she looked afraid. That's between us, Dylan said through his teeth. You made it between us, I replied, when you called me a freeloader at my own table. A long, quiet minute stretched out. The candles burned lower. Somewhere, snow tapped at the windows like small, patient fingers. I could hear the house breathing. I straightened up, took my hand off the chair, and looked around at the people Dylan had collected to be impressed. I'm sorry you were invited into this, I said to them. You came to share a meal, not watch a family break. Mary swallowed, her voice soft. "Jasper, do you want to sit down?" "Yes," I said, "at my seat." I stepped to the head of the table again. Dylan moved with me, an instinctive lunge, but he stopped himself halfway, suddenly unsure. He was calculating. He was measuring the room and not liking the numbers. "Don't," he said, but it wasn't a command anymore. It was a plea dressed as authority. I set my hand on the chair back a third time and left it there. I didn't yank the chair out. I didn't grandstand. I simply made contact with what had been mine for decades and let the truth do its quiet work. "Son," John said gently, "this isn't your house." No one contradicted him, not even Stella. Dylan's breath came faster. He scanned the table, hunting for one ally, one lifeline. He found none. The audience had changed scenes without him. He laughed then, a harsh wrong sound. "Fine, fine, if that's how it is, eat your precious dinner at your precious table." His eyes were wet. "But don't expect me to sit here and pretend you're the victim." I didn't say I was the victim. I didn't say anything at all. I pulled the chair out 2 inches. The legs whispered against the floor. The sound went through Dylan like a jolt. "This isn't over," he said, voice dropping to a low threat that didn't reach as far as he thought it did. "You think you can talk to me like this? Embarrass me? In front of my friends?" "In front of my neighbors," I corrected, not unkindly. "In my dining room." He stared at me, vibrating with anger he'd mistaken for power for too long. His hands clenched and unclenched. The only sound was the slow tick of the clock in the hall and the small hiss of cooling gravy. I let the room stay very, very quiet, and I didn't sit down. I let him feel every eye on him, every truth he'd tried to drown out with volume. I let him realize he'd built his big Christmas performance on my floorboards and my goodwill, and that both had limits. Stella folded the dish towel, suddenly small. "Dylan," she whispered, "maybe we should—" He jerked away from her voice. Pride is loud, wisdom whispers. The guests did the kindest thing they could do for both of us. They said nothing. They let the moment stand. They let the truth be heard without applause or boos. That's when Dylan's shoulders finally dropped, not in surrender, but in retreat. He backed away from the chair like it had burned him, turned sharply, and stalked out of the room. His footsteps pounded up the stairs, a child's thunder in a grown man's body. Stella didn't follow, not right away. We all stayed where we were, arranged around the table like figures in a painting. No one touched a fork. No one reached for the wine. The candles guttered a little, a tiny draft passing through the room like a sigh. Mary cleared her throat. "Jasper," she said softly, "what would you like us to do?" "Wait," I said. And we did. We waited while the house calmed, while the echoes faded, while the stage lights dimmed. We waited for the moment when the next line would be delivered, not by Dylan, not by the guests, but by me. Because it was my house, and the next act would be mine. The dining room looked like a battlefield dressed in fine linen. The turkey still steamed, the candles still flickered, the wine still glistened in crystal glasses. Yet no one lifted a fork. The food, the decor, the effort, all of it was overshadowed by what had just unfolded. Dylan's heavy footsteps echoed upstairs, then a door slammed shut, rattling the chandelier overhead. Stella stood frozen in the doorway, wringing the dish towel between her hands like she could squeeze the tension out of the room. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, shifting in their seats, unsure whether to stay or go. I remained standing at the head of the table, my hand still resting on the back of the chair that Dylan had tried to keep from me. I felt calm, not angry, not vindictive, just certain. Mary broke the silence first. "Jasper," she said gently, "maybe we should—" "No," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. "This needs to be said." I turned toward the staircase, speaking loud enough for Dylan to hear wherever he was sulking. "You have until morning to move out." The words carried no malice, no raised voice. They were simply fact, delivered as clearly as an engineer reading measurements off a blueprint. Gasps rippled around the table. Stella's face went pale. John leaned forward, as if to confirm he'd heard me right. Anne's eyes flicked between me and the staircase, waiting for Dylan to storm back down. But the house remained silent. "Jasper," Stella finally found her voice. "It's Christmas. Surely we can—" "It was Christmas," I said, still steady. But the moment my son called me a freeloader in my own home, the holiday ended. He crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. The guests looked down at their plates. No one touched the turkey. Even Stella didn't move to serve it. I pulled the chair out slowly and sat down for the first time that evening. My place, my table. The wood felt solid beneath my hands, a reminder of everything Margaret and I had built. Across from me, Mary set her glass down with care. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly, her eyes shining with sympathy. "Sometimes love means setting limits." I nodded once, no triumph, no gloating, just relief that someone else could see it too. Tom cleared his throat. "Maybe we should head out. Give you space." "Yes," John agreed, already pushing his chair back. "It's probably best." Chairs scraped softly against the floor as one by one, the guests rose. Coats were fetched quietly from the closet. Dishes gathered, polite murmurs exchanged. No one lingered. The party that Dylan had orchestrated so proudly had collapsed into silence and shame. As the front door clicked shut behind the last couple, I remained seated at the head of the table. Stella still stood in the doorway, her arms limp at her sides, tears brimming but unshed. "I'll talk to him," she whispered. "Talk all you want," I replied, "but he has until morning." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded once and slipped away toward the stairs, the sound of her steps soft and defeated. For the first time in 8 months, the house felt quiet again. Not the heavy silence of resentment or exhaustion, but a silence filled with possibility. I looked around the table, Margaret's china, the turkey, the centerpiece that wasn't mine, and realized it no longer mattered. The real feast was the peace I felt taking root in my chest. I stood, pushed the chair back in, and extinguished the candles one by one. Each flame snuffed out felt like another burden lifted. Christmas dinner had ended, not with dessert or carols, but with truth. And come morning, it would end with freedom. The morning came quietly, the kind of stillness that only follows a storm. No clattering pans, no running water, no footsteps from the guest room. For the first time in months, I woke to silence. The digital clock on my nightstand read 10 a.m. The deadline had passed 2 hours ago. I dressed deliberately, choosing pressed slacks and a collared shirt, buckling the leather belt Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to stand firm, clean, steady, unmistakably in control. The staircase creaked under my weight as I descended into the aftermath of Christmas dinner. The dining room looked like a crime scene of family betrayal. Wine glasses still dotted the table, half full with expensive vintages I hadn't chosen. Turkey bones and congealed gravy sat abandoned on Margaret's china, desecrated by a night no one would forget. The cream tablecloth, once pristine, bore grease stains and red wine rings like scars. In the living room, folding chairs leaned against the walls. Torn wrapping paper from gifts Dylan and Stella had bought with my pension still littered the floor. On the coffee table, my coffee table, Dylan's leather jacket was draped carelessly across it. I remembered watching him swipe his card for that jacket, knowing full well the money wasn't his to spend. I made coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, mixing with the faint, sour odor of last night's abandoned feast. I sat at the table, mug in hand, positioned where I could see the hallway that led to the guest bedroom. I didn't pace, I didn't fidget, I simply waited. Finally, floorboards creaked overhead. A muffled voice, Stella's, drifted down, low and tense. A toilet flushed. Doors opened and closed. At 11 sharp, Dylan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, rubbing his eyes, dressed in silk pajamas Stella had bought him. His hair stuck up in messy clumps. His face wore the casual confidence of someone convinced the storm had already blown over. "Morning, Dad," he said breezily, padding barefoot into the kitchen. "Coffee smells good." He reached for a mug without hesitation, the one Margaret had painted years ago. the one that read World's Best Husband. He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter like a man in his own home. "Sleep well?" I asked. "Yeah." He blew on the coffee, sipping casually. "Listen, about last night. Things got a little heated. You know how holidays are. Emotions run high. People say things they don't mean." He grinned like he'd just smoothed everything over with a single sentence. "Pretty heated," I repeated. "Exactly. But it's Christmas, right? Well, the day after. Time to move past it. Family's family." That phrase again. Family's family. The shield he always hid behind when his excuses ran thin. I set my mug down. "Fine will be when you've moved out." The words landed like bricks. For a fraction of a second, Dylan's mask slipped. Then he laughed, the sound hollow. "Come on, Dad. You can't be serious about that deadline nonsense. What do you expect us to do? Pack up our entire lives overnight?" "I expected you to start last night," I replied. He blinked, chuckled nervously. "Be realistic. Where exactly are we supposed to go? It's the day after Christmas. Nothing's open. No apartments, no jobs. We need time." "You've had 8 months," I said flatly. His posture stiffened. "So what if we don't leave? What's your big plan then?" I rose from my chair, walked calmly to the phone mounted on the wall, and wrapped my hand around the receiver. Dylan's eyes followed, his confidence cracking. "Dad, wait. This is ridiculous. You can't." I lifted the phone. "You'll see." His face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare." But I had already dialed. The police arrived in 23 minutes. 2 officers, one younger, one older, both wearing the calm professionalism of men who'd seen family disputes like this before. "Sir," the older one said, "we received a call about a property dispute." "Yes, officer." I handed him the folder I had prepared. Deed, mortgage statements, utility bills, all in my name. "These individuals have been living here without lease or rental agreement. I asked them to leave. They refused." Behind me, Dylan appeared in the hallway, still in those ridiculous silk pajamas, face pale with disbelief. "Officer, this is crazy. He's my father. We had a family argument, that's all." The younger officer glanced through my paperwork, then back at Dylan. "Sir, are you listed as an owner or tenant on this property?" Dylan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Well, no, but then you need to gather your belongings and leave the premises." Stella appeared on the stairs, wrapped in her robe, her face blotchy from crying. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. "I'd recommend gathering essentials now," the officer replied. "You can arrange to collect the rest later." The next hour unfolded like clockwork. Dylan alternated between furious protests and desperate bargaining, but it didn't matter. The law was simple. It was my house, not his. Boxes thudded down the stairs. Stella collected her cosmetics from the bathroom. Dylan stuffed clothes into suitcases with angry, jerking movements. 8 months of invasion was undone in 60 minutes, reversed under the watchful eyes of law enforcement. Neighbors peeked from porches. Curtains shifted. Mrs. Henderson walked her dog past twice, slowing each time, no doubt eager to carry the story to the rest of the block. "This isn't over," Dylan hissed as he carried the last box to the car. His voice was low, venomous. "You think you've won something here, but it's not over." I opened the front door for him. "Have a safe trip, son." He glared, but the officers were right behind him. His defiance carried no weight in their presence. At last, the car roared to life. Dylan gunned the engine, tires crunching over snow as they sped off down the street. The officers finished their paperwork, advised me of my rights if harassment continued, and wished me a quiet afternoon. Then they left, their patrol car disappearing into the white haze of falling snow. I stood in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of last night, empty glasses, stained linens, forgotten gifts, but the air felt lighter, cleaner, freer. On the coffee table lay Dylan's expensive watch, left behind in the chaos. I picked it up, felt its heavy weight in my palm, then set it outside on the porch. If he wanted it, he'd have to come back for it. When I stepped back inside, I closed the door firmly behind me, and for the first time in 8 months I felt the house exhale. The silence wasn't empty. It was peace. That Christmas didn't end the way I'd imagined, but it ended the way it needed to. My son learned the hard truth. You can't bite the hand that feeds you and expect it to keep feeding. The house was mine again, filled not with freeloaders, but with peace. And peace, I realized, is the greatest gift of all. If you enjoyed this story of dignity and justice, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if someone called you a freeloader in your own home?